The phone lights up at 11:43 p.m. Not during birthdays. Not after job interviews. Not when your father was in the hospital. Only now. A name appears on the screen, someone you once called a friend, and before you even open the message, your body already knows what it will say. Hey, can I ask you for a favor? There is a specific silence that follows messages like this. A silence so familiar that the nervous system learns it before the conscious mind does. The slight tightening in the chest. The involuntary pause before replying. The strange mixture of guilt, obligation, and exhaustion that arrives all at once, as if the request itself carries emotional gravity. Most people think friendships collapse through betrayal. That is rarely how it happens. More often, they erode through asymmetry. Quietly. Gradually. One-sided emotional transactions repeated over years until affection becomes indistinguishable from extraction. And the disturbing part is that many people never notice the transition while it is happening. Because human beings are not designed merely to seek connection. They are designed to preserve access. Long before civilization, before language, before cities and laws and social etiquette, survival depended on maintaining proximity to useful people. Anthropologists believe early humans survived not because they were individually strong, but because they mastered reciprocal dependency. Food, protection, shelter, information, all of it moved through relationships. To be isolated was often fatal. The modern mind still carries this ancient architecture. Researchers studying social reciprocity noticed something unsettling. The brain often processes social debt similarly to physical discomfort. Functional MRI scans suggest that imbalance in relationships activates regions associated with stress monitoring and conflict detection. The nervous system appears to track fairness automatically, even when the conscious mind refuses to. Which explains why certain friendships feel exhausting before they feel painful. Your body notices the imbalance long before your identity allows you to admit it. Because admitting it creates another problem. If someone only reaches for you when they are drowning, then what exactly were you to them during all the moments they could breathe? That question destabilizes people. Especially kind people. Especially empathetic people. Especially those raised to believe usefulness is the same thing as love. And so they continue answering the calls. Again. And again. And again. Not because they are naive. But because intermittent affection is psychologically powerful. Behavioral psychologists discovered decades ago that unpredictable rewards create stronger attachment than consistent ones. It is the same mechanism observed in gambling addiction. The uncertainty itself becomes intoxicating. A person who neglects you 9 times but appears emotionally vulnerable on the 10th interaction can create stronger emotional fixation than someone consistently present. The brain begins chasing emotional resolution. Not connection. Resolution. This is why the friend who only calls when they need help becomes psychologically difficult to leave behind. The relationship survives on emotional suspense. Every new message carries a hidden possibility that this time might be different. This time they might ask about you first. This time they might finally see you. But they rarely do. Because some people unconsciously assign roles to everyone around them. One person becomes the entertainer. One becomes the therapist. One becomes the rescuer. One becomes the emotional landfill where anxiety can be unloaded safely before disappearing again into silence. Civilization calls this friendship. Psychology sometimes calls it regulation. There is a difference. The unsettling reality is that many relationships are not built on mutual recognition at all. They are built on emotional utility. The other person does not necessarily value who you are. They value how you make their nervous system feel. Calm. Supported. Validated. Stabilized. And human beings are remarkably skilled at confusing relief with affection. This is why certain people seem warm only during crises. Watch carefully. When their world collapses, they become deeply attentive. Emotionally expressive. Vulnerable. Present. They speak with urgency, intensity, even tenderness. Then stability returns. And so does distance. Because the connection was never sustained by curiosity about you. It was sustained by need. There is an ancient cruelty hidden inside conditional closeness. Not intentional cruelty. Most of the time, the person themselves does not fully understand what they are doing. Human beings are masters of unconscious self-preservation. The mind edits reality constantly to protect identity. Few people wake up believing they are emotionally exploitative. Instead, they tell themselves simpler stories. We just drifted. I've been busy. They know I care. But patterns reveal motives more honestly than words ever will. Who appears only during collapse? Who disappears after recovery? Who remembers your pain only when discussing their own? The answers usually arrive slowly. And slowly is what makes them dangerous. Because gradual disappointment does not trigger immediate alarm. It normalizes itself. Like a crack expanding through glass 1 invisible millimeter at a time. By the time the fracture becomes undeniable, years have passed. Shared memories exist. Emotional history exists. The mind resists abandoning emotional investments, even painful ones. Economists call this the sunk cost fallacy. Human relationships obey it constantly. People remain loyal to draining friendships because leaving would force them to confront a terrifying possibility. That the relationship they mourn never fully existed in the way they imagined it. That realization can feel less like heartbreak and more like waking up inside a familiar house and discovering the walls were painted scenery all along. Still, something even stranger happens next. Many people do not become angry. They become guilty. Guilty for feeling tired. Guilty for pulling away. Guilty for wanting reciprocity. Because somewhere along the way, modern culture romanticized emotional self-erasure. Endless availability became proof of goodness. Boundaries became selfishness. Exhaustion became compassion. But the nervous system keeps records the personality tries to delete. Researchers studying emotional labor notice that chronic one-sided support often produces symptoms associated with burnout, irritability, emotional numbness, cognitive fatigue, withdrawal. The body begins interpreting the relationship as prolonged resource depletion. Which means the exhaustion is not imaginary. It is biological. And biology is difficult to negotiate with. There is a reason forests collapse when too many organisms consume without replenishing the soil. There is a reason stars eventually die after burning themselves into emptiness. Nature itself depends on exchange. Nothing survives permanent extraction. Not ecosystems. Not civilizations. Not people. And yet many individuals spend years trying to become emotionally infinite for others. Until one day, something small exposes the truth. Maybe you stop texting first. Maybe you disappear for a week. Maybe you decide not to rescue someone from consequences they created themselves. And then the silence arrives. A silence so complete it reveals something horrifying. The relationship only moved when you carried it. That moment changes people. Quietly. Not always outwardly. Sometimes no confrontation happens at all. No dramatic ending. No final argument. Just a subtle internal shift where affection is replaced by observation. You begin noticing things. How conversations orbit back toward them. How your grief interrupts less than their inconvenience. How they know your usefulness more intimately than your inner life. And once seen, these patterns become impossible to unsee. This is the painful side of psychological maturity. As children, we think closeness means presence. As adults, we slowly discover presence can be counterfeit. Someone can sit beside you for years without ever truly seeing you. The philosopher Simone Weil once suggested that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. Not assistance. Not advice. Attention. Genuine recognition of another consciousness beyond its utility to us. By that definition, Many people are not lonely because they lack relationships. They are lonely because nobody is truly observing them, including their friends, especially their friends. And perhaps that is why these one-sided relationships hurt so deeply. Not because favors were asked. Human beings need each other. Dependency itself is not the tragedy. The tragedy is invisibility. To realize someone knows your value but never wondered about your interior world, that creates a uniquely modern form of grief. You become emotionally present but psychologically unseen. Useful but unknowable. Needed but not understood. And eventually, the mind reaches a threshold. A dangerous threshold. Because once a person recognizes they are loved primarily for what they provide, two instincts begin fighting inside them simultaneously. The desire to leave. And the terror that leaving proves they were only valuable in the first place because they were useful. That conflict traps millions of people inside emotionally unequal relationships. Not only friendships, families, romantic relationships, workplaces, entire social systems. Civilization itself often rewards self-abandonment more than self-awareness. The person who gives endlessly is praised, admired, relied upon, until they stop. Then the atmosphere changes almost immediately. Not always through cruelty. Sometimes through confusion, irritation, distance. Because the role they occupied inside the emotional ecosystem has disappeared. The machine notices missing functions faster than missing souls. And that realization carries a coldness difficult to describe. To understand that some people never actually adapted to your presence. Only your service. But there is another side to this story that people rarely discuss. The friend who only calls when they need help is not always manipulative in the cinematic sense. Sometimes they are simply emotionally undeveloped. Sometimes nobody taught them reciprocity. Sometimes survival shaped them into permanent crisis responders, moving from one emotional emergency to another without ever learning how to maintain connection outside catastrophe. Trauma can distort intimacy profoundly. For some individuals, vulnerability becomes transactional because they only learn to seek connection through distress. Calmness feels emotionally invisible to them. Stability feels unfamiliar. So they unconsciously recreate crisis because crisis guarantees attention. Researchers studying attachment patterns noticed something strange. Certain people feel closest to others only during moments of instability. Their nervous systems associate emotional intensity with relational safety. Without urgency, the connection feels unreal. Which means some people do not disappear after healing because they stop caring. They disappear because they no longer know how to exist relationally without pain. That does not excuse the damage. But it changes the shape of it. Because the deeper tragedy may be this. Many human beings do not actually know what healthy friendship feels like. Not deeply. Not consistently. They know dependency. They know distraction. They know convenience. They know shared entertainment. They know mutual coping. But mutual witnessing? Sustained emotional reciprocity? Quiet presence without extraction? That is rarer than society admits. And perhaps this is why adulthood feels increasingly isolating as awareness grows. Not because people become colder, but because perception sharpens. You begin distinguishing between those who contact you because they value your existence, and those who contact you because they need temporary relief from their own. The two can sound identical at first, until silence tests them. Silence reveals almost everything. Who notices your absence without needing something first? Who asks questions that are not strategically connected to themselves? Who remains present when you are no longer emotionally useful? These questions become terrifying because they force confrontation with a possibility modern life constantly hides beneath notifications, conversations, and social performance. That many connections survive proximity but cannot survive stillness. And yet, despite all of this, human beings continue searching for friendship. Not because they are irrational, but because somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the performance, beneath the unconscious transactions and emotional economies and survival instincts, there remains an ancient human hope. To be recognized without needing to earn recognition first. To be called without a crisis attached. To be remembered without utility. To be seen beyond function. Perhaps that is what real friendship has always been. Not constant communication. Not endless agreement. Not emotional dependency. But the rare and almost miraculous experience of being known as a person instead of a resource. And in a civilization increasingly built around performance, productivity, and invisible emotional extraction, that kind of recognition begins to feel almost sacred. Which may explain why its absence hurts with such disproportionate force. Because when the phone lights up at 11:43 p.m., and you already know the message before opening it, the pain is rarely about the favor itself. It is the sudden realization that some people only reach toward your existence when something inside theirs is collapsing. And once you notice that pattern clearly enough, you begin hearing the silence between messages differently. Not as absence, but as evidence.